Today on Inspired Money.
There was a moment where my husband said, you never ran this firm to maximize profit. You ran it to maximize impact in the world and flexibility in your life. And you're trying to sell it now for maximizing profit, which is why it's not working. And as soon as I let go of that and thought about what's the impact I want to make in the world, right? How do I build an institution and not a cathedral? I was able to end up maximizing profit in the end.
This is episode 110 with keynote speaker and best-selling author Laura Gassner Otting. Welcome to Inspired Money. My name is Andy Wong, a managing partner at Runnymede Capital Management. Each week, we bring you an interesting person to help you get inspired, shift your perspectives on money, and achieve incredible things. From making it to giving it away, Inspired Money means making a difference, creating something bigger than oneself, and maybe, just maybe, making the world a better place. Thank you for joining me. Hey, Inspired Moneymaker, welcome back. If it's your first time listening, welcome. I really enjoy speaking to different guests on Inspired Money and asking them how they define success. So today I want you to ask yourself, how do you define success? Many of us spend our lives pursuing a singular idea of success. Sometimes that idea is internally driven. It's an idea that maybe we've had since a young age. Other times, our definition of success is impressed upon us by someone else. Maybe it was our parents, a teacher, a boss. The trouble is, as we chase gold stars and grind toward our dream, many of us still feel incomplete. Today's guest is Laura Gassner Otting. Her friends call her LGO. She wrote the Washington Post bestseller Limitless: How to Ignore Everybody, Carve Your Own Path, and Live Your Best Life. She wants you to ignore the rules that created your limits, align your energies with your actions, and do work that really matters. As you're about to hear, she was a presidential appointee in Bill Clinton's White House. She went on to found a very successful executive search firm, which partnered with mission-driven nonprofit executives from startup dreamers to scaling social entrepreneurs to global philanthropists. Definitely inspired money stories. And she'll share with us stories from her extensive experience that spans her 25-plus year career. In this episode, you'll learn LGO's unique path from aspiring public servant to entrepreneur and her changing definitions of success, how she changed the model of executive search to build a fast-growing company. And she shares her process of selling the company that she built, along with some of the challenges that came with that. Now let's get inspired with Laura Gassner Otting. Laura, welcome to Inspired Money. I'm so excited to have you on the show.
Thanks, Andy. It's great to be here.
Let's jump right in. What's your earliest childhood memory of money?
So when I was growing up in Miami, I lived just far enough from the local 7-Eleven that I had to ride my bike there. And I remember always being super excited when I would get my allowance and I would have enough money to ride my bike to 7-Eleven and buy a Slurpee. And sometimes they would have like special days where the Slurpees would be like half price or you can get like a bigger size. And I remember being super excited about that and also super sad the first time I fell off my bike and all of my change, all of my quarters came out of my big plastic basket on the front of my Huffy bike and splattered all over the street and into the canal. Because again, I grew up in Miami on the water and that was a lot of sadness.
Just your story. I could feel the pain.
It was so painful. I had to ride my bike all the way back home in the hot Miami sun with no Slurpee. And you know, there's really nothing sadder than that.
Growing up in Miami, you went to a school that was pretty diverse.
Yeah, I did.
What was that like?
I did. My school was like 1/3 Latino, 1/3 African American, 1/3 white. But like the white kids, some of them were super wealthy growing up on the water with a yacht in their backyard. Some of them were on food stamps. The Latino kids, they were from Colombia, from Cuba, from Puerto Rico, from Mexico. They were from everywhere. And then the African American kids, same thing, Dominican, Haitian. It was like the United Nations. You know, it's funny because after Barack Obama was elected president, people were like, oh, you know, it's like a post-race society. And it was like, Miami in the 80s was a post-race society. It was just a really different time to grow up. And I live now in Boston. And I always say to people, it's like there's like a currency. Everywhere you live, there's a currency. And in Miami, it was like, how big is your boat and who does your plastic surgery and like how fancy is the car that you drive and are you wearing like Z Cavaricci jeans or, like how fancy are the brands you're wearing. And here in Boston, the currency is like, where do you summer and where do your kids prep, right? Like what Ivy League school did you go to? So it's just a really different universe. And I think everywhere you live, there's just a different currency to that place. But it's all still the same stuff, right? Like people are still sizing you up with that currency.
At one point, you had aspirations to be in politics and public service. When did that start?
When I was growing up, we watched the 6 o'clock news every night at dinner. And at the end of the 6 o'clock news, the anchor would give like an editorial. Like there would be like a sign that went behind them and it was like opinion and they would give an editorial. And it wasn't like today when the news was like infotainment. Like they would talk about an issue that was facing the community, the state, the city, the country, whatever it was. And we would watch it as a family and then we would talk about it. And it just became really clear to me super early on that the people who solved the problems were the people in elected office. Like those were the leaders. Right? Those were the ones who solved the big problems in the world. And so I thought, I want to be one of them, right? There are all these problems. I was the Iran-Contra affair and the hostage crisis. And I was like, I want to help solve the problems. Someone has to do it. It should be me. How can I help? I want to go out there and I want to solve the problems. And so I just decided early on that was going to be me. And I would go to law school and I would run for office and I'd, be the first female senator from the great state of Florida. And that would be my path.
And what happened?
Well, I skipped kindergarten. I graduated early from college. So I was a little ahead of my time. I got to law school when I was 20 and I looked around.
Before you get too far into that, I want to understand, like at that time, you had this, it sounds like unbendable drive. And was it a case where anything other than perfection was not okay?
Yeah, I grew up in a house where if I got a 98 on a test, my parents would be like, well, where are the other 2 points? Because there was just an expectation. Like if you knew your material and you were prepped for the test, you should get 100%. So even today, when my kids come home from school and whatever grade they get, whether it's an A or an F, I'll ask them 2 questions. Does that grade reflect your knowledge of the subject? And does that grade reflect your preparation for the exam? And if they say yes, then I say, great, awesome. If they say no, then it's like, okay, well, you have work to do, right? But that whole idea of where are the other 2 points, because perfection is the only acceptable definition of success, was definitely how I grew up. And it was, I had an unbendable drive, but I think my parents also instilled in me an expectation that perfection and success were one and the same.
Do you see that as a good or bad thing? I mean, obviously you're doing things differently with your own children.
I'm doing things differently with my own children, but I also have amassed a huge amount of privilege in my life that allows me to do things differently with my own children because my parents raised me the way they did. So it was difficult. It was unbending, but it also set me up to be able to do things today that I probably wouldn't have been able to do if they were like, oh, you got a C+, great, awesome. Go get the Slurpee, right? Like, so it's, there's no control group. It's hard to say.
So I'm sorry, I cut you off.
Oh, for my failure. Yes. So I get to law school and I look around on the very first day and I'm like, wow, I've made a huge mistake. I don't belong here. I don't want to be a lawyer. I don't actually have anything in common with my fellow classmates. I'm not interested in my professors and what they're teaching. This makes no sense for me. So I dropped out.
And it wasn't a case of like you had this vision and that was just going to be a necessary component to get to where you ultimately wanted to be.
Well, what I realized was that my vision was wrong, right? So I've come to learn that if things aren't working the way you expect them to work, it's not necessarily because you're taking the wrong steps. It probably is because the premise of the argument in the beginning is wrong. And the premise, which was the only way that I could solve big problems was to be in elective office, was actually wrong. So the reason I dropped out of law school is that once I realized that I should not be in law school and I was miserable, I did what most young people do when they're miserable, is self-destructive behavior. So I started dating a guy who was terrible for me, terrible, awful. And I used to ride my bike to campus. And this day it was raining. And I promise the bike is not like a theme throughout my story. It just happens to be these 2 questions. But I ride my bike to campus and it was raining that day. And so this guy said, I'll give you a ride home. I'll put your bike in the back of my IROC Z, right? I'll give you a picture of who this guy is. But I want to stop at this guy's office. He's running for president. I want to stop at his local campaign office and pick up some papers about where he stands on issues. So this was like back before the internet. So in order to figure out who you wanted to support in a presidential race, you had to actually stop at their like a local campaign office in a strip mall. So we go to the strip mall in Gainesville, Florida, where I was in law school. And I walk into the room so he can pick up his papers. I was like, Governor who? From where? Arkansas? Like, not a chance in hell. Like, no way. George Bush had just won Desert Storm. He had a 91% approval rating. Like the Democratic Party was running the sacrificial lamb from Arkansas. Like nobody cared. But I walked in the corner of the room was this little black and white TV. And on that black and white TV was then Governor Bill Clinton. And he was giving this impassioned talk about service. And he said, there's nothing that's wrong with America that can't be fixed with what's right with America. And he offered as a policy proposal this idea of national service, community service in exchange for college tuition. And it was like a thunderbolt hit me. And I went, that needs to happen. And in that moment, I went from thinking, how can I help? How can I be the solution? How can I be the person who defines the problem through myself as the solution? And how do we get the right people in the right place so that the solution that needs to happen actually happens? That was the moment when I decided I don't belong in law school. I started volunteering on the campaign. A few weeks later, all four principals, Bill, Hillary, Alan, Tipper Gore, all came through this tiny podunk town of Gainesville. And we got 36,000 people to show up for this rally. So the national office, of course, like sat up in their seats and was like, who are these volunteers?
How did you do that?
Yeah, well, we worked our butts off, right? I mean, we
Is that pounding the phone?
It's pounding the phone. It was knocking on doors. It was doing, it was putting papers up in every supermarket and every classroom and everywhere you go. And it was also a combination of him as a candidate and Rock the Vote and him having an appeal to young people and Gainesville being a college town. And so there was like a lot of factors that worked in our favor, but we really worked super hard. And so when the national office saw that, they were like, well, who are these volunteers? We need to hire them. And hire them means like, we'll pay you ramen soup and cold pizza, and you can sleep on high school gymnasiums and school buses and travel all over the country. So I dropped out and I took a leave of absence. And the dean at the time told me that I was making the biggest mistake of my life. So she gave me a year's leave of absence. I never went back, obviously. And I ended up in the White House working in the office that actually created the AmeriCorps program.
When the dean told you that you're making the biggest mistake of your life, how do you feel? Do you feel like, now I'm doing the right thing? Or are you worried that, okay, what if the dean is correct?
No, I had bowel shaking anxiety. I was like, she's probably right. This is probably the worst mistake of my life. But my parents, who heretofore had been incredibly inflexible, said to me, we'll give you 6 months. We'll give you 6 months of rent. You figure out how to pay for food and electricity and everything else. We'll give you 6 months of rent. And if you can't get a paying job in the next 6 months, you'll come back and finish law school. So you want to talk about incentive, right? I mean, I did not want to go back to law school. So I was incredibly incentivized to figure it out. I was incredibly incentivized to find the cheapest apartment I could, to save up all the money I could, so I wasn't squandering it on an apartment where I wasn't going to be at, because I was going to be working 24/7 as a volunteer. I remember going to the grocery store when they were having sales, and it was like lean cuisines for $1, and I get my groceries for like $7. There I was. I had dinner every night for a week. And those are the kinds of things you do, when the ramen soup goes on sale for 39 cents instead of 79 cents, you get a whole case of them. That's what you do when you're like, I've got $250 a month and it's got to last, or I've got to go back to law school.
You're trying to make it work.
You just do anything you can to make it work.
And then I understand that you were even willing to give blood to open up
you have done your homework. So that's actually how I got my first paid job in the White House. Yes. So I was there doing volunteer work, data entry, basically, like mind-numbing, boring stuff. And the guy who was running the office was a guy by the name of Eli Siegel, who was a great mentor, an amazing mensch. My first book is dedicated to him. I was walking out of the office one day and there was a piece of paper on the wall and it was like a blood drive. And there were slots every 15 minutes and there were 4 cots every 15 minutes. And I noticed that there was one that he was signed up for where there were 3 people. He was one of the 3 and the 4th cot was empty. So I signed my name. And now what's funny about the story is that I have this condition, this very unexciting, non-fatal, non-communicative condition called vasovagal syncope, which basically means when I get dehydrated or in moments of like real anxiety, I pass out. So, when you give blood and then you sit up and all of a sudden you're lightheaded, I pass out. So I looked at this and I was like, well, okay.
Worth the risk?
Worth the risk? High risk, high reward? I don't know. So we go and I literally have, he's like I have a trapped audience. He's like strapped to the next bed with the needle in his arm. So I figure I have 15 minutes to bleed as slowly as I possibly can. They give you those little squeeze balls and they tell you to squeeze so that you bleed faster. And I was like faking it. I was like, maybe I'm squeezing. I'm not really squeezing, but I'm like trying. I also knew that people who are dehydrated tend to bleed slower. So even though I thought maybe this was dehydrate me, like I didn't drink a lot of water the day before. Like I tried everything I could do because I was like, I don't want to pass out next to him because that's not really confidence inducing, right? So I spent 15 minutes on the cot next to him, trying as hard as I could to bleed as slow as I could. But at the same time, also like be presentable and talk about why I was there and kind of try to impress him. And at the end of it, he asked me to do this project where he said, it would be really great if we could find out why the Peace Corps was a success from the minute John F. Kennedy launched it and why the war on poverty was a failure from before Lyndon Johnson even announced it publicly. Could you go find that out for me? Small project.
Easy assignment.
Easy. No problem. I'll just go to the internet. Oh, wait, that doesn't exist yet, right? Like it was pretty tough, but these are the things that you do, right? Like I literally bled for the job.
Literally. Yeah.
Literally.
You're willing to go above and beyond.
I will do whatever it takes.
So you were in your 20s, and even though you dropped out of law school, but you were on a track that most 21-year-olds were not on.
Yeah, I was, but this is like the days before social media, right? So like I didn't know what track anybody else was on. I couldn't compare myself to anyone else. I had no clue. I went to the University of Texas because I didn't want to go to University of Florida because I wanted to get out of state. And I knew I couldn't get into an Ivy League. So I thought it was like there were the Ivy Leagues and then University of Go State, right? Like I didn't know that there were engineering colleges and liberal arts colleges and art schools. And like, my world was so small. I had no clue what anybody else was doing. And then when we got there, the White House, people say to me all the time, like, isn't it amazing? Like, were you so excited? Were you nervous? What were your feelings? And I say, I didn't really have any. Like, we were so young and naive. We didn't know that failure was an option. We were just like, this is a great idea. We just have to get the right people on board. And of course it's going to work. Like, we just assumed that it would work. How crazy is that?
Well, when you're young, you don't know any better. You just do what you do.
Yeah.
But
the naivete of youth is a beautiful thing.
It can be a great thing.
It's a great thing. I had no idea. And then when one day they were like, oh, well, the White House has a credit union. You can set up an IRA and, retirement accounts and put money. I was like, what are these things? And why would I do that? Like, I had no concept that people did these things. I was still a child. I literally was 21 years old. Like there were so many things that happened back then. Like we didn't, like people would work all the time. We would sleep under our desk. We would order in pizza. Like it didn't occur to us that those were weird things to do. It was a campaign atmosphere. We were just, you're either all in or you're not. And there just wasn't anything in between.
When you're all in, is your focus just on the day to day, or what are your goals and aspirations at that time?
Oh, hey, my only goal and aspiration at that time was not to be found out for being a complete and total fraud. My only goal, I would walk into these offices and there were all these bright young things that all went to Harvard, and they were walking in with their dog-eared copies of the New York Times, and they read cover to cover, and they've been up since, 4 a.m. And they had highlighting, and they were, they had cut out articles, and they would sit before meetings would start. And they were writing furiously on notepads. And I was like, what are they writing? They must have so many ideas that they can't even contain them. They have to come out and write them down on these notepads. And I didn't have any ideas. I didn't really know anything. So I would start imitating them, right? I would get the New York Times or the Washington Post and I'd read them from cover to cover, and I'd walk in with my little legal pad and I'd sit at the table and I'd try to come up with something to write, and I couldn't. I would just write summaries of articles that I just read, even though they were completely, not related at all to whatever we were talking about. But I felt like I needed to be producing ideas. And I was so worried about being found out for not belonging. I went to University of Texas. I didn't go to Harvard or Yale or Princeton or any of these places all these people went. And while University of Texas is by no means a bad school, I wasn't in the club. Like I didn't have a parent who was, who had some sort of like waspy nickname and had been raising money for the Democratic Party for, donkey's years. I was like some girl from Miami who bled for the job. Like I was an interloper. That's how I felt. And so my only goal at that time was not to get found out. And I was so busy working on not getting found out that I actually think I missed a lot of what was happening around me. Right. I think I probably could have set amazing goals and had all kinds of relationships and gotten to know people and learned a ton of things and increased my knowledge and my resource and my access if I had just stopped trying so hard to fit in, to fake it, and just let myself be like, I don't know. I'm gonna actually ask questions and absorb and sit and watch, as opposed to trying so hard to like look like I belong here.
Yeah, and some of that I would guess, that comes with maturity. Being comfortable in your own skin so that you're not so focused on that.
Yeah, I think a lot of it does come from maturity. The problem was that there were so many people there who were my same age, but who had already had like grown-up experiences. Like before they went to college, they were at prep school, right? And if you're at prep school and you're like away from home and you're living at like a boarding school, you already have like a pre-college experience before you even get to college. Like they'd had so many more experiences in life than I had had in my sheltered experience, that we were the same age, but they seemed so much older, right? They seemed so much more sophisticated than I was.
I'm so curious to really know, because I would guess that even though that's what it appeared on the exterior, everybody has the same insecurities and imposter syndrome and fake it until you make it.
I know that now, right? Like now I know that the people who look like they've got it all together are the ones that are like paddling underground. They have the worst. They're the ones who are paddling underground the most, right? The lady doth protest too much. All these people that you see on Facebook with their perfect lives, they're not perfect. Nobody's got a perfect life. Nobody's got it all figured out. And it's really interesting because if I looked back on it now, if I could like be like a fly on the wall, I could see all the tells. It would be so obvious to me. I spent 20 years interviewing people. After I left the White House, I went into executive search for nonprofits, and I spent 20 years interviewing people. And when you do interviews for leaders for nonprofits, you care about what they've accomplished, right? But it's not all about like increasing shareholder value. You really want to know why somebody's doing what they're doing, why this cause, this organization, this approach to solving the problem matters to them. And when you do that, you really have to get deep into like their story. So one of the things that I've gotten really good at is like getting in really fast to somebody's story and figuring out like what makes them tick, like why they care about this thing. So I've gotten to see all the body language, right? Like when you start approaching something that's uncomfortable, like the legs cross or the arms cross, or they start looking away a little bit, or they fidget, or, maybe they sweat, or like they're like little things that happen. They turn their body just so, like there's just little things. And if I were to look back now on the staff meetings back in the White House, I could probably pick out every single one all around the table instantaneously. But at the time, I was scared out of my mind.
It sounds like you could have been an FBI agent too.
Yeah. One of my favorite quotes from Eleanor Roosevelt is, I have a lot of favorite quotes from Eleanor Roosevelt, but my favorite one about like imposter syndrome is this: we would worry a whole lot less about what other people thought about us if we realized how little they did. Right? Like we're all so busy thinking, what do they think of me? What does he think of me? What does she think of me? Here's the big secret. They're not thinking about you. They just don't care. They're so worried about themselves and what you're thinking about them that they're not thinking about anything about you other than how that affects them.
Coming up, we talk about LGO's special sauce for building such a fast-growing company, insights into how she sold her company, all that and more right after this short break. The show notes for this episode can be found at inspiredmoney.fm/110. If you're listening in your car or wherever you are, check the show notes if you want to learn more about Laura or things mentioned in the episode. It's time for the Runnymede Money Tip of the Week. If you have a 401k plan, have you reviewed your investments lately? It's a really good time to do so. If your company offers a plan, make sure that you're taking advantage by participating. If your company matches any part of your contribution, make sure that you're contributing at least up to that amount. And To do even better, I hope that you're socking away as much as you can. Next, take a look at your investments. Are you invested appropriately for your age? The simple rule of thumb used to be to take 100 and subtract your age. That's how much you should have in stocks. With people living and often working longer, to be more conservative, you can take 120 and subtract your age. So for example, if you're 40, take 120 minus 40, and that's 80. You could be 80% invested in stocks. If you're 30, you would be 90% invested in stocks. So you can do this really simple calculation and use that as a gauge for your stock versus bond allocation. Next, I want you to look at your investment choices. Go to a website like morningstar.com to check the historical performance and fees, also listed as expense ratio. It's best to look at multiple periods, so you can look at 1 year, 3 year, 5 year historical numbers, net of fees, of course. That means performance numbers accounting for fees that are taken out. So generally, it's preferable to be in funds that do not have high fees. If your plan offers you low-cost passive index funds, compare the performance of those low-fee choices against actively managed mutual funds and see which have better performance, right? Because you don't want to blindly go with the low fee. So net of fees, see which ones have better performance. See if you need to make changes based on the percentage that you want to allocate towards stocks and based on performance. Make your choices and review this again 3 months from now. If you need help, let me know. I want to offer this. Email me your investment menu with ticker symbols, and we can run a quick report to show you the performance and the fees. It's really good to do this exercise regularly. I don't recommend looking at your plan daily, but if you review an update every quarter or every 6 months, it can really help you to stay on track and make sure that you're growing your nest egg over time. And if you're doing all these things regularly, a more advanced tip is to increase your contribution over time. Some plans have a feature called auto escalation, which will do that for you automatically. So if you have that option, consider taking advantage of that. If you do not have auto escalation, that's something that you're going to have to do manually. And as always, the earlier that you start, the better. That's the Runnymede Money Tip of the Week. Inspired Money is brought to you by Runnymede Capital Management. We help you to plan, invest, and worry less. What's your biggest financial challenge right now? As I mentioned, if you need help looking at your 401k plan, fund information, log into your 401k plan website, print the investment choices with the ticker symbols, and go to inspiredmoney.fm/Andy to email me. Just write that you want help reviewing your 401k, and I'll reply so you can send me a scan. You can send me an attachment of your fund choices with the symbols, and we'll do our best to run a report for you. You're listening to Inspired Money. I'm Andy Wong. Eventually, you were able to sell your executive search company?
I was, yeah. I founded it, ran it for 15 years, and then eventually sold it to the women who helped me build it.
That was a real success story. You grew that firm over 15 years.
It was probably one of the hardest things I've ever done. The sale of it, the growing of it was the second hardest thing I've ever done.
How were you able to grow that business successfully?
So we grew the business 100% every year for the first 10 years. It was exhausting. And I founded the company when my eldest child was 6 weeks old. Pro tip, don't start a company when your eldest child is 6 weeks old, especially if you had 24 hours of labor and an unplanned C-section and can't actually walk to the bathroom by yourself when your son is 6 weeks old. But I started it because a friend of mine from the White House called me up. So I was in the White House. I left the White House. I went to go work at a big search firm, bricks and mortar, old traditional search firm. And I did that for 4 years, really learning from the best and the brightest how to do this work for nonprofits, really exceptional, not 98%, 100% work for these nonprofits.
How much of that is networking and making connections with
all of it,
as many people as you can?
All of it. All of it. It is. And that's part of why I did it. Like, what do you do when you leave the White House and you have no ostensible skill set whatsoever, but a Rolodex that can choke a horse? So you go into executive search. So,
which is a great business.
It's great business. And, I'm a Yenta, so it's perfect. I got paid to be a Yenta. I got paid to fix people up and ask them about themselves and figure out what makes them tick. It's a great job. It's a job I never would have thought to look at when I graduated from college, and I fell into it and was the perfect job for me. So I loved it. I loved it. So I did that for 4 years. And then I had this moment of rage. I realized that there was a better way to do the work, that I could do it faster and smarter and with more profit and more authenticity and more integrity than the way the traditional firm was doing it. It became really clear to me one day that we were not actually the solution. And once I realized we weren't part of the solution, it became even more obvious that we were part of the problem, right? You're either the solution or you're not. There's no in between. Either you're the solution or the problem. When I knew I wasn't part of the solution, I couldn't live with being part of the problem. So I went into my boss's office and I was like, here's a way to do this work, a brand new way to do this work. And we should do it because it'll be better for our clients. It'll be better for our people. It'll be better for the world. And he said, no, thank you.
What was problematic about what you were doing in your view?
So the way that a traditional search firm works is they charge 1/3 of the first year's cash compensation. Period. That's arbitrary, right? When I was at University of Texas, I took a leadership class from Sarah Weddington, who argued Roe v. Wade in front of the Supreme Court. She was 27 years old when she did this. And she told us she didn't get the case because she was the smartest or the best or the most resourced lawyer in all of Texas. When she graduated from law school, they weren't hiring lady lawyers in Texas. She went to go work at a public, a public interest law clinic. And in one day walks Jane Roe. So she gets the case, and the way that she won the case is that she learned every single rule in the entire judiciary system, and she was able to run circles around all the good old boys in their boots, right? She understood how to create all the arguments and how to get around everything that she had to do, all the way up to the Supreme Court. And I took that lesson to heart. Years later, when I was sitting in that search firm thinking 1/3 of the first year's cash compensation, this makes no sense, right? Like, what is this based on? I thought I should go back and figure out the rules. And I went to figure out where this rule came from. And it turns out it came from nowhere. It was completely arbitrary. It came from the for-profit sector's executive search rule, but it doesn't make sense for nonprofits. So if I'm doing a search, and I'm doing a search for, say, the Ford Foundation, and they're looking to pay their chief strategy officer $300,000 a year. So my fee is going to be $100,000 a year. That's not actually that hard of a search. Everybody wants to work for the Ford Foundation to be the chief strategy officer. That's a pretty attractive search. If I'm doing a search for like a director of clinical services for a local domestic violence shelter, and they're paying $50,000, so I may be getting 20, say, because we've got like a minimum fee, that search is going to be really hard because that job, right? That's a hard job with a ton of turnover. And there's not a lot of people who are necessarily qualified for it or who can do it at that level. It occurred to me that this is super arbitrary, and that as somebody who's working at a search firm, I was incentivized to do more work for the Ford Foundation and give them my best and my brightest and my most eager time. And the last 5% of my day was being committed to the domestic violence shelter. And I felt like that was unfair to this organization that really needed our help even more than the big organization. And so I just felt like I was incentivized to behave badly on my side. Also, if it's 1/3 of the first year's cash compensation, who am I negotiating for? Am I negotiating for the salary to be as fair as it can possibly be for my client, or for me so that I can make the biggest fee? There were just all kinds of like cracks in the system to me, and it just didn't make sense.
Yeah, you question the reason why it's been done the way it had been done.
Yeah, and you wonder like why do clients not get up in arms and say, we're not going to do that? It makes no sense whatsoever. And so what I said was, what if we charged our clients based on the complexity of the work? So if it's going to take us 100 hours to do the work, or 300 hours to do the work, or 20 hours to do the work, let's just charge them that amount. And so we went in saying, there are organizations like the Domestic Violence Shelter who can't afford us. But for the amount of money that they have, we can actually teach them how to do the work themselves. And by the way, maybe the Ford Foundation will give them a grant because that's capacity building, because they'll then know how to do that work for all the rest of their openings here on out, so that they could get the best and the brightest to help them do their work, but not break the bank. So they could actually keep more money, pay their people better. We could actually leave capacity with them long term. And my people were incentivized because I was paying them the same amount by the hour to work with the small organizations or the large organizations. And so we incentivize the right behavior from all of our people. And at the same time, we incentivize the right behavior from our clients, because we opened the whole book to them. And we said, we're going to show you who the candidates are that we're calling. We're going to show you who the sources are that we're calling. We're going to show you the organizations that we're trying to look through and, find other people. And if you see holes there, then you tell us and we'll keep going. And so it became more of a partnership. And so the way search firms work is they'll charge 1/3 of the first year's cash comp, and then they'll redo the search for free if anything goes wrong within a year. And I also found that didn't make sense, because if you say to somebody, we're going to redo the search for free, that means as a search firm, I'm only incentivized to give you all the same kinds of candidates you've seen before, which generally tend to be pale, male, stale, right? They tend to be the same kinds of people. So you don't get diversity of thought. You don't get diversity of life experience. You don't get diversity of any way that you might describe it. And so the innovation in your organization is held back. So what we said was, I want to incentivize my clients to take bigger risks, but I want them to be in the car with us while we're figuring it out. And in 15 years of doing search, I think the firm maybe had to redo 1 or 2 searches, which is obviously, it doesn't even compare to big firms where they have to redo searches all the time, even though they're still giving you very traditional candidates.
And tested over 15 years. That was proof of concept.
Proof of concept.
It worked.
So, why did we grow? How did we grow as fast as we grew? We grew because we walked into organizations and we said, all right, so you've just heard from 4 other search firms, all of whom are charging you 1/3 first year's cash compensation. Why are they charging you that? And people will go, oh, I'm not so sure. And then they say, wait, but you're a virtual firm. You don't have offices, which of course is why we could charge people less. We didn't have the same overhead. And early on, I remember a guy, pale, stale male, an old guy at the end of the table going, oh, so you're virtual. Does that mean, because this is like back before people had virtual offices, right? Like this was groundbreaking. And he was like, oh, you're virtual. Does that mean you're not real? Ha 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 ha. All smug, right? Like,
I don't know about search firms in the nonprofit space, but I know that search firms in for-profit, I visited years ago when I got out of college. They were always the nicest buildings. I think I visited one and there was a grand piano in the lobby.
Yeah. So here's the question that my business partner asked this guy. She said, the last search firm that you guys had, the one that didn't do such a great job, which is why you're talking to us right now. And he was like, yeah. And she said, how nice was their office, right? They had beautiful office spaces. And he said, oh, I never visited their offices. They came to us, right? You were looking for a job, so you went to the offices.
I did.
The clients, though, he was like, we never went. They came to us. Of course they came to us. Why would we visit their office? And she said, wow. She goes, then let me ask you a question. Why are you paying for that nice office? And he was like, oh. And all of a sudden, our business model made a lot of sense.
So you were always challenging conventional thinking.
Yeah, you question the premise.
So you sold the business. Are you looking to retire at that point?
I didn't really know. So I ran the business for 10 years. And at the 10-year mark, I realized that it'll take me a little while to sort of pull myself out, right? To like unravel myself from the business. Professional services business are notoriously difficult to sell. So I knew it would take some time. I realized that 5 years hence, I'd be 45. I would have been doing executive search for 20 years. The business will be 15 years old. I was like, those seem like good numbers, right? Like, that's a good place to, and we were going to get to, a number of, a top line profit number expected by then that I was like, yeah, those are good numbers. So I turned to my business partner and I was like, I need a 5-year plan. And she kind of went through like the 7 stages of grief, right? There was like denial, there was negotiation. She's like, no, you're not really leaving. And
right, because it was your baby.
Right. She was like, you're not really leaving. This is who you are. This is what you do. This is it. This is like this is you embodied. Then there was, negotiation, like, well, what if we kept you and you just ran this other thing, this like skunkworks operation on the side? And then there was anger, there was blame, there was like, you can't leave. What you're going to leave us and what's going to happen to us? I mean, there's the whole roller coaster of emotions, which surprised me. I wasn't expecting that. I'm not a really emotional person, and I was sort of shocked by the emotion that came back at me in this moment, the fear and the anger and the terror of what's going to happen to us when you go. But, we worked through that over time. And it did take 5 years to kind of unravel myself from the whole thing. We did a valuation of the company. The valuation came back with a pretty big number. And they were all like, well, we can't pay you this. Like, we don't have the cash. We can't pay you this. And what if when you leave, the business disappears? Like, what if you're synonymous with, even though your name's not on the door, what if you're synonymous? And like, what if we just left and just started our own firm? Like, we could just do that, which they could have just done that. But I'm really proud that in my career, everything I've ever created, whether it's governmental programs or philanthropic giving circles or political action committees or this company, it all still exists. I'm really proud that I built institutions and not cathedrals. Like, that's like one of my big legacy
That's
things.
not easy to do.
It's not easy to do. And it takes a lot of subsuming your ego.
Was that by design on your part?
Yes. When I was interviewing people in my firm or, for these jobs, people would tell me about great things they created. And if you ask somebody what a great thing they created, they'll tell you and it'll sound amazing. And then if you ask them if it still exists 6 months after they've left and it doesn't, then you realize either they're a micromanager or they built something that wasn't strong enough, or they were really the only one who cared that much about it and put all the energy into it. So it reveals a lot about what's missing in their leadership if things don't still exist after they leave. So I learned pretty early on that institutions are better than cathedrals. So then we get the valuation back and it's this big number and they're hemming and hawing about whether or not they can pay it, which, comes from a real place of fear, right? I would have done the same thing. But I got my panties in a bunch, basically. Like, my ego was up in arms and I was like, well, do they think I don't deserve it? Like, I didn't pay myself for the first few years. I'm just getting paid now. Like, that seems to make a lot of sense. But I let my ego sort of get in the way. And I think that probably made the exit harder than it should have been, because my logical brain got like all, mixed up. Eventually, though, I got really good advice, and the advice was just sell them the firm for $1, right? Sell them the firm for figure out the valuation number, figure out what that number is that you would have to get paid out if they gave you a percentage of profit over the next 5 years. Because really, once you sell, 5 years is as far as you can cast a shadow back. After 5 years, you can't really take credit for success, I think. So I sold them the firm for $1 plus a percentage of revenue as long as they showed even a penny of profit for the next 5 years. I would get a percentage of the top line revenue, which really made sure that we all had skin in the game.
Yeah, it's a win-win, it sounds like.
Yeah, like I couldn't leave and denigrate the firm. They still had to, try hard. Like we were all sort of still in it together. And it turns out I'm 4 years into the 5 years, and it turns out I'm actually going to get paid more than the valuation. Like, I'm already ahead now than what the valuation would have been. So at the end of the day, subsuming my ego and saying, you know what, I'm selling it to you for, I'm not going to make you give me all the money you possibly can. There was a moment where my husband said, you never ran this firm to maximize profit. You ran it to maximize impact in the world and flexibility in your life. And you're trying to sell it now for maximizing profit, which is why it's not working. And as soon as I let go of that and thought about what's the impact I want to make in the world, right? How do I build an institution and not a cathedral? I was able to end up maximizing profit in the end.
It's a valuable lesson. I love that. I want to ask you about your book.
Yeah.
Limitless. And I looked at your website and it says, too many people don't believe they can do incredible hard things. They don't believe they deserve the life they dream of. They let roadblocks stop them in their tracks. They let security and money keep them small.
Yeah, I believe that wholeheartedly. I mean, the story I just told is a great example of that. I think we spend so much time thinking about other people's definition of what success should be that we let that get in the way of who we really are able to be. Like the person that's inside of you. Those moments when the very best of what you're called to do, the very best of what you're able to do is being brought about to solve a problem at hand. And it happens to be a problem that you care about deeply. And then you're being rewarded for that in a way that is either psychically or financially rewarding, in a way that's meaningful to you. Those are the moments when you're in consonance, when you're in alignment, when you're in flow, when the what you do matches the who you are. And those are the moments when you can be limitless. Those are the moments, have you ever had one of those meetings where you're so amped up from the meeting that you're driving home and you can like feel your heart beating on the hood in front of your car. Like it's pulling you along. You can't wait to get home to like get started. You can't wait to get back to the office to get started. You have to like go for a run. You have so much adrenaline because you're so excited about this thing that's just right. That's what this book is about. It's about how to find that in your work, in your career, so that you can have that life of being limitless.
And part of that is trying to define what's meaningful to you, right? And what's purposeful.
Yes. And for everybody, it's different. And not only is your definition of consonance different than my definition, each of us at every age and at every life stage, it'll be different. So like when I was 21 and I was working on the political campaign, I was totally fine eating ramen soup and lean cuisines. Now I'm 48 and I'm not so fine eating ramen. You know, I'd be more than happy to like sleep on a high school gymnasium floor. And now I don't want to sleep at the Holiday Inn, right? Like it's like you become a different person at different times. So what you're looking for in your life, like what you do consider to be psychically or financially rewarding, is going to be different at different points. You may want to be on the periphery at some point. You want to be in the middle at some point, but each of us will define it differently. And then each of us at different times will want different things. And I think what the problem is that we end up having these ideas keep us small because we either let other people define for us what success is, or we say, oh, sunk cost. I've already spent so much time working on this thing. I should just stay at it because that's what I do. And we don't give ourselves permission to fail and reinvent.
I like to ask all the Inspired Money guests, how do you define success?
So I define success as being able to do work that I love with people that I enjoy. And that's really it. I do believe that if you do good work with good people, money follows, rewards follow. And just evidenced by the stories I've told, I've never been interested in maximizing profitability today. There's two numbers, right? There's the want to make number and the need to make number, right? So the need to make number is table stakes, right? You got to pay your mortgage. You got to like put food on the table. You got to, dress the kids who keep growing every year, right? That's the need to make number. But the want to make number is really the difference between the Holiday Inn or the Four Seasons, right? The flying in coach or the private jet, right? There's a broad range of dollars and zeros behind your paycheck that goes between one and the other. So for me, success is really somewhere between the need to make number, approaching as close as I can to the want to make number, but in a way that allows me to not do it in sacrifice of the time that I want to spend with my family or the work that I want to do for my community or personal growth or other things that I want. I'm okay with not maximizing the want to make number as long as I know the things I'm doing are eventually leading me towards closer to the want to make number. So sort of future income.
I like that. It sounds very balanced. There's a number that's enough, but you're accounting for not just the numbers. You're accounting for other quality of life and family and other priorities.
And I also believe there's a lot of different ways to get paid, right? Like there's price and there's value. So, I make my living right now as a keynote speaker. I travel around the world giving motivational talks and helping people sort of in self-development and success and being limitless. And so I have a fee that I charge. I will negotiate my fee, but I will never negotiate my value. And the difference is that you may not pay me that number of dollars in my fee, but maybe you pay me half of the dollars of my fee and then you do like a bulk buy of 500 books and you also have a 4-camera shoot. So I know I'm going to get good video. And there are other people on the agenda who I really want to meet who are worth, my making a little bit less money so that I can meet them because they're speaking at other events that I really want to speak at and they'll recommend me after they see me. Or, I was just at an event in Canada where Robin Roberts was the keynote and I was like the undercard, right? But I got to meet Robin Roberts and I ended up on Good Morning America, right? I spoke for free at that event, but they flew me out there. They bought 500 books. I had a beautiful photo shoot and camera shoot. I had great video from it. And I got to meet Robin Roberts and I ended up on Good Morning America, which sold tons of other books, right? So I negotiated my price, but I didn't negotiate my value. And so I think the difference between the need to make number and the want to make number is somewhere in that personal rubric of price versus value for you personally. Now, it may be that you say, I have all these, bills. I have to make as much money as I possibly can right now. And then later I can worry about it. And that's fine. Or you may say, I'll deal with that later. But there's no right answer. Like everyone has their own. And I'm not about shaming people about, whether their answer makes sense or not.
I love that. Don't compromise your value. Well, thank you, Laura. Thanks for sharing all your stories today and the lessons that we can draw from them.
Thanks, Andy.
Really appreciate it. Can you tell the Inspired Money listener where they can follow you and learn more and get your book?
Yeah. So my name is Laura Gassner Otting, but all my friends call me LGO. So you can find me on all the socials at Hey LGO, HEYLGO. And heylgo.com is a shortcut to my website. My book is on Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, 800 CEO Reads, anywhere fine books are sold. And if people are trying to figure out how to live a limitless life, I actually created an assessment. You can go online, limitlessassessment.com. And I'll say that again for the commuters, limitlessassessment.com. And it takes about 20 minutes. It's kind of intense, but as any of your listeners will know from listening to me, I'm kind of intense. So, this is your life. You should be intense about it. It takes about 20 minutes and it will help you figure out your own personal rubric of consonants, how much calling, connection, contribution, and control you want to have in your life and how much you actually have right now. And where they're not aligned, it'll give you some tips about how to get there. So that's at limitlessassessment.com and I'm at Hey LGO.
Thank you, LGO.
Thank you so much.
So what was your favorite Inspired Money moment? I love how LGO saw a different way, a better way to partner with her clients and serve them more effectively when she was doing executive search. It can definitely be tough to buck convention, especially when you have to explain it. And then when it came time for her to sell her company, when she wanted to exit, her realization that she wanted to build a business for maximum impact, not maximum dollar value, is a really good lesson. She had to maintain that mindset to help make her exit happen. Focus on impact, and hopefully the money will follow. It certainly did for LGO. Thanks so much for joining me on this mission. Are you in the Inspired Money Makers Facebook group yet? If not, join us at inspiredmoney.fm/Facebook. If you like this episode, let me know. Post in the Facebook group or tweet me at RunnyMeadCap. That's RUNNYMEDECAP. And lastly, if you have topics or guests that you'd like to hear on Inspired Money, let me know. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you in advance, and I'll see you next week. The music you're listening to right now and all other music on today's show is by the amazing Jim Kimo West. Have an inspired week and do something that scares you, because that's where the magic happens.